Chapter 21. Zach thought the day before Dani went back to work, that empty day when he just had to wait until he got to keep Mark, was going to creep by, but he helped his dad out by taking a day at the store. He'd been so busy, the day had almost flown by. Then he was so tired, he'd slept like a rock. He didn't even remember dreaming last night. He'd been sound asleep when his alarm had started screaming, startling him upright, before he remembered why he'd set it. He slapped the alarm, finding the one small button that would shut it off, not just snooze it, then got up. He should have 10 or 15 minutes before Dani got here with Mark. That was enough time to get dressed and make coffee. The coffee had finished brewing, and Zach was pouring himself a cup when gravel crunched in his driveway. He took his mug with him to the door, opened it, and watched Mark hop out of the little SUV, say something to Dani that Zach was too far away to hear, and run his way. "Inside," Zach said when Mark got close, then raised his hand to wave at Dani. She waited until Mark was inside before backing up, turning around, and heading to work. Zach watched until her taillights disappeared through the trees that surrounded his place, then went back inside and closed the door. Mark was sitting on the edge of the sofa, a backpack on over his coat. The coat was a little heavy for this time of year, even in the cool mornings, and Zach wondered if he was cold. "You already eat breakfast?" "I had cereal." Zach shuffled into the kitchen on bare feet. There's nothing wrong with cereal, I eat it myself sometimes, but I'm gonna make some pancakes. You want some? I can eat again? If you want. Zach pulled out a bowl and the few ingredients he would need. Mark got up off the couch and sat on the far side of the bar, watching Zach. "Are you going somewhere?" Zach asked. "Huh?" Mark frowned. "Are you going somewhere?" "No." Mark's brow furrowed. "Are you cold?" "No." "Then take your coat off. You can put it on the hook behind the front door for now." Zach dumped ingredients into the bowl and started mixing them while the boy was busy with his coat. By the time the skillet was hot and he was ready to start cooking, Mark was back on the far side of the counter. "You look like you have something on your mind." Zach watched him out of the corner of his eye, not looking directly at him so as not to intimidate him. "I do." Mark took a deep breath and started again. "I was thinking about, wondering really if it would be okay with you, maybe." He sighed. "I want to call you Dad, but only if you're okay with it." A full feeling filled Zach's chest, making speech impossible and breathing difficult for just a moment. He coughed, giving himself a moment to recover. "Have you talked to your mom about this?" "I did, she said I had to check with you." For not the first time, even today, he mentally thanked whoever had sent Dani back up to the lake. "If your mother's okay with it, then I'd love for you to call me Dad. But only if you're okay with it." That wasn't quite what he meant, so he took a deep breath and tried again. "I would love for you to call me Dad, but I didn't want to ask and make you feel like you had to. I've never called anyone Dad, and I can't imagine having one I like better than you." Zach smiled. He knew there would be times Mark wouldn't feel that way, so he would savor the boy's adoration while he had it. He flipped the first pancake and wondered if every dad got this huge swell in their chest when their kids called them Dad, or if this was because he'd missed out on so much and had been given a 9-year-old instead of a baby. He may never know. The first pancake was done. He put it on a plate and slid it in front of Mark. "Here. Start with that. I've got something I want to show you after breakfast." He poured more batter and wondered how Mark would like the surprise. After breakfast, Zach led Mark into one of the 2 extra bedrooms in the cabin. One was a guest room with a bed and all the things needed for guests. That wasn't this one. This was the room Zach considered his playroom. "I thought you might like this," He stopped. Go ahead, open it. He stood to one side so he could see the boy's face as he opened the door. Mark twisted the knob and pushed the door open slowly, as if he was unsure about what would happen. As the door swung open, revealing the interior of the room, Mark's mouth fell open and his eyes grew wide. He blinked, then looked at Zach for a minute before turning back to the room. His eyes scanned the shelves on two walls, not entirely full but full enough of small creations and figures Zach had built and left on display. This is yours? It is, and you're welcome to play with it. Are you sure? Mark looked at him as if uncertain. Completely. Go on in. Zach motioned him into the room, and followed as the boy took several hesitant steps. Once he could get past him, Zach went to the square dining table in the middle of the room and pulled out a chair. Check this out. He reached under the edge of the table and pulled out one of several drawers he'd mounted to the underside, revealing a supply of Legos. Leaving that drawer open, he moved to the one beside it and opened that. Seeing the building blocks ready to be used was all it took. Mark stepped close and ran his hand over the blocks in one drawer, grabbing a handful and lifting them onto the table. He was instantly absorbed in what he could create. It took him a few minutes to sit, and that was done absently, as if he'd forgotten the chair was there and that he was standing. Zach smiled as he watched Mark's fingers fly as he quickly pieced something together, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. After a moment, he scanned the table, then looked in the drawer, combing his fingers through it, as if he was looking for something specific. What are you looking for? Zach asked. An axle. Those are over here. Zach opened another drawer, revealing axles and tires of several sizes. They're even sorted, Mark whispered. Flat pieces? Here. Zach wondered what he was making, but didn't want to distract him by asking. Mark caught on that everything was sorted and started opening drawers himself, finding what he needed, then adding the right piece to his creation. Ta-da! Mark said after a few minutes, holding a small helicopter in the palm of his hand. Wow! That's great. You didn't even have to think about how, you knew exactly what you needed. I'm impressed. It's just one thing. Mark looked around at the shelves. Did you make all these? I did. Mark moved away to look at the shelves more closely, scanning them one by one. You can take things down if you like. You sure? I am. A huge grin spread across Mark's face as he continued to inspect the shelves. He'd made it about halfway across the room when he reached for one of the something made of Legos. Zach looked at it a moment and realized that this one could most accurately be described as a figurine, or maybe a model. Model kind of fit. Mark pulled down the recreation of a dinosaur and looked it over from several angles before he brought it to the table and sat it down. He looked at it for a few minutes, then took out a handful of bricks. It took Zach a moment to realize what he was doing. He was looking at the creature and trying to figure out how to recreate it. In that moment, he knew he and his son might have their issues in the future, but they would always have this common ground.